let's talk about Equal Rites by Terry Pratchett. So this is arguably the first real Discworld novel. What I mean by that is this is where Pratchett brings real character depth and discussion of ideas into his books on top of the satire, the gags of the first duology, Colour of Magic and Light Fantastic. And there are two main characters, so if we're going to talk about character depth and ideas, let's start with characters. There are two main characters, Esk, or Escarina, and Granny Weatherwax. And Esk is the 8th child of an 8th son, and she's mistakenly given the staff of a powerful wizard because obviously the 8th son of an 8th son has great magical power, and it turns out that so can the 8th daughter, and so she's given this magical staff, which of course is a problem because the wizarding world is a masculine world. Granny Weatherwax, on the other hand, is the local witch in the rural area they live in, the midwife, the advisor, the healer, the local slightly magic woman. Witches are magic users, but in a very different way. They like to rely on non-magical solutions, headology, psychology, to get their way, and when they do use magic, it is very often much more subtle, much more with the rhythm of things rather than kind of wizarding magic blowing everything up. So they might borrow the mind of an eagle and ride along with the eagle, just manipulating its actions, just looking in certain directions, that sort of thing. And now as Esk's magic gets away from her, Granny ends up becoming her mentor, her teacher, teaching her witching, but there is always a tension with this very different power source that Esk has. So, because Esk does learn witching and does find witching interesting, but she also has this powerful staff and an innate ability to use it. And so eventually Granny ends up taking Esk to the great city of Ankh-Morpork, which is a sort of London cum Lankmar locale. It's a place combining both fantasy and real tropes, and it's called Ankh-Morpork, partly after Lankmar by Fritz Lieber. And it's also where the prominent training college of wizards in the Discworld is, the Unseen University, which is a kind of exaggerated, ridiculous, humorous version of an Oxford or Cambridge sort of system. And there are a few basic things going on here worth talking about. First, with the characters, are these basic character arcs, if you like. For me as a Discworld veteran, it feels really interesting in the whole context of the series. This was a reread after over 20 years, and if you're a Discworld veteran, I'd love to hear specifically your thoughts about the kind of way that Pratchett develops characters and starts to write characters over that time. So Granny, for instance, is, well, she's not the character that Pratchett wrote most about. That's Sam Vimes. She is not the one closest to Pratchett's own character. Perhaps again Sam Vimes, Moist von Litvig. But here she is, I think, the archetypal Discworld character. She's the one who defines the setting most. She's the one who sums up so much of the feel of Discworld. And I don't mean in its silly side, which I don't think it's fundamentally a silly setting in the way some people might think it is. But she sums up a lot of the moral instinct and ideas of how humans work. And here she is nearly fully formed. This is where she first appears. She's definitely the same Granny who appears a few books later in Weird Sisters, and who is relevant to to the very last book of the whole sequence, The Shepherd's Crown. She is a dominant figure in the cycle, and this is where she first appears, and it is the same character. But she's also, well, either you could say she's not completely developed, or you could say perhaps she's just a bit younger. She has to reconcile her own strong rural views and values with the strengths and weaknesses of the big city, and this mentoring, almost mothering or grandmothering relationship she has with Esk, responsibility for other people, working out what their needs are and helping them accomplish them when they are different to your own. She's also a force of nature. She is the real Conan the Barbarian figure, if you like, in these books. Not Cohen the Barbarian, the kind of comedy Conan in Discworld, but she really is the force of nature who shapes the world around her, and that she requires certain results from it. She is, though, nonetheless a little out of her depth sometimes in this novel, and I think that is part of what leads to what is her character arc here of reconciling the very big fish in a small pond to quite a big fish in a big pond tension. Esk, on the other hand, starts off a little indistinct, just a precocious child character, I think a fairly ordinary precocious child character. But she develops over the course of the story in notable ways, particularly as she tries to help her friend Simon, and she feels like a first draft of Pratchett's last leading witch character, Tiffany Aching. There's a link between the two, and it's fitting that Esk reappears after a break in writing of over 2 decades, I think, in Tiffany Aching books. The other thing going on here is a discussion, and this connects to the characters of course, but about identity, role, and to a degree gender. Ironically, it's less about gender than you'd think, given the title is Equal Rites, and it's obviously a pun about, can wizards be women? Up front, there's a, oh, isn't it bad and darkly funny that women can't be wizards, given that Esk is very good at wizardly magic. That's the upfront thing. And it's obviously a live conversation to some degree in the 80s, not about magic, but, as you start to see the full flourish of women entering the workforce, you can see that there's an ongoing discussion here happening through this one lens about that. The deeper question, though, is what if Esk has competing talents and desires? She's a tween. She's 11 or 12, I guess, during the latter half of the book. And she's struggling with the different components of human identity at that stage. She has passions and hobbies. She has a proto-romance to handle. She has to work out how to define herself in respect of the adults around her, the wizards who mock and dismiss her desire to become a wizard, her parents, and Granny, particularly her proxy mother, who sort of reluctantly accepts this wizardly fate, but is alien to the direction Esk is going in, it seems. And Pratchett does explore those through the novel, I think, that identity question. I think it's something he probably never explores quite in the same way for that sort of character of that sort of age, even with Tiffany much later on. It's not as subtle or as careful or as reflective as in later novels, but it's very good. I enjoyed it. I found it kind of an interesting exploration and an interesting early work by a great author. The gags are funny, the pace is sharp, it doesn't struggle too much, I think, with, it's not very long. My copy here is 280 pages in this sort of mass markety style size. There's maybe a degree of, we're popping to a new thing. It's very much still in the picaresque mode that the first 2 novels were, but with much more weight and depth. It's got quite good world building, I think. It's one where there's actual time spent to describe beauty in the Discworld, which is not what you think of from satirical novels. There are also the barge-dwelling Zunes. There's the different witches in the book you meet. There's the establishment of rural life at the beginning. There's a bit more, mostly humorous detail about the Unseen University and the reappearance of its librarian, who in the previous books had been turned into an orangutan by a magical accident and doesn't want to be turned back, and he becomes one of the main characters, really, of the series, of the whole sequence as a recurring character. It's all in all a very good place to start in Discworld if you're interested in starting in Discworld. I think if you're thinking about the witches, I would start here rather than Weird Sisters. I don't think you're going to hate it. I think you're going to really like it if you're into it, into the general concept. And then it will add to Weird Sisters as you get to it. You'll hear other people disagree with that and say start with Weird Sisters, but I'd say start with this, or perhaps with the most commonly recommended starter novel, Guards. If you have read Equal Rites, or if you have opinions about the witches in general, I'd love to hear more about what you think in the comments, and maybe just say what your favourite witches novel is, and we can include both the main witches sequence and the Tiffany Aching sequence. Till next time.